What we found out is it's kind of a mess. It's insanely difficult to implement, insanely difficult to train and learn. People are just kind of in over their heads with a lot of it, and it requires consultants and power users to get pretty much anything done.
JD, Aidan, welcome to the High Conviction podcast, where we talk to visionaries who are pursuing bold ideas, perceive what others miss, and are taking big bets on it. So I'd love to hear what you guys are building right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Pleasure, pleasure to meet you, and thank you for having us on.
Thanks for your time. So I would say at a high level, what we're building is an AI-driven construction ERP platform that kind of covers all of the business critical software use cases of a construction company and kind of flips the narrative of enterprise software on its head. We really want to lower the barrier to entry for especially non-technical users to be able to get what they need out of our software and go about their jobs and daily lives as quickly and easily as possible. And we think that kind of AI at the heart of everything is the way that that can happen. Yeah.
How did you identify this problem and decide that this was the right approach to solving the problem?
So we kind of started off by being like way back in our beginning of our entrepreneurial journey. We decided to be CRM consultants. And so we decided to do some discovery before we kind of started getting in and doing these projects for people and just understanding people's usage of enterprise software. And what we found out is it's kind of a mess. It's insanely difficult to implement, insanely difficult to train and learn. People are just kind of in over their heads with a lot of it, and it requires consultants and power users to get pretty much anything done. And so we kind of fundamentally disagree with that being the case. We think kind of siloed softwares that are difficult, hard things to utilize, things like Salesforce or Zoho, how we were initially CRM consultants, shouldn't be done that way. And so we decided to kind of go down this path to making enterprise software easier and more available for people.
Yeah. And I think like the conversations that we had in the beginning were everything. I came from like a Salesforce consulting background as a power user with starting to get my certifications and things. I still hated using it. I still found it to be a hassle. And then I would hop on calls with clients that we were building solutions for, testing new features, and it was just a nightmare every time. And so like the user experience of like legacy enterprise grade software was horrible. But once we had started talking to small to mid-sized business owners, especially ones who couldn't really afford consultants a lot of the times and afford to kind of put their business on pause to try to implement these big softwares, we actually found that it's not just CRM. There's great examples for for your project management software, for the Excel that you use for everything in between. And so that's kind of how we came to this thesis of having a true single source of truth, with AI kind of being the ultimate bridge between the people who are making the software for not having to become technical experts to get what they need.
I'm a data engineer by background, so I know intimately well what that looks like. Typically, CRM implementations come with data management issues. How have you gone about solving that for your specific market segment?
I was actually a data CRM consultant. So I did a lot of ETL in my time. And with like government data, it was horrible. That came with a lot of spreadsheets and spreadsheets of data cleaning, super meticulous, time consuming stuff. I think it's good parallel to draw, like how we're looking at, or how we're seeing more AI in terms of customer service, customer success and support, and how AI has kind of revolutionized that part of business already, and how many good results we're seeing there. I think the other side is seeing how AI can be leveraged in client discovery and business discovery, along with that data migration and data management. And so that's actually kind of what we're working on right now with a couple of our pilot users, is going through the manual process of client discovery, data discovery, and getting a feel for their data architecture and all of their current softwares, and turning that into a repeatable process with agentic AI. We think that it doesn't need to be so much manual, less human in the loop, but more of human down in the weeds of cleaning data, finding duplicates, and just, ensuring high data quality. It's still a work in progress, but I think there's a lot of exciting stuff that we're finding when we're working with our pilot users?
Data migration and data more scalable without having to increase headcount and physical hours of working on it, making it a solution that can be scaled without scaling up the personnel.
Early pilots, have you found any signals that you guys are taking the right bet and thinking about things the right way?
I definitely say so. I'd say when we kind of speak with these pilot users, when we have these first conversations, we pretty much just start off with one simple question. It's, what does your software look like? That immediately triggers them to tell us our narrative right back to us. We hear exactly what we're trying to solve pretty much every time we bring up that kind of topic in discussion.
Yeah, I think like the first time that really happened, it was the easiest conversation we had ever had up to that point. Like we'd done a lot of refining on our idea, going from being CRM consultants to making our own CRM technology to having more of a single source of truth kind of ERP play. And once we had settled on that, that kind of changed the questions that we were asking to get more of a holistic overview of what software looked like and how it interacts with the people in the business on a day-to-day basis. And what we found was like, in our own market research, like there were some pretty crazy numbers. McKinsey has like fantastic studies, especially on construction inefficiency and, the potential for productivity gains from, new solutions. But it kind of seemed too good to be true. We had to like go actually talk to people and like make sure that this was real. Companies doing tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue, talking to back office managers that spend most of their time, data wrangling and waiting for reports to come in, kind of marshaling power users across different departments, one in Salesforce to get them a simple sales report because they're the only one with the license. Another, like checking in with their field team manually on the phone to like get any progress reports, like having paper reports put on their desk that they already got from email like an hour ago. Like it's a ridiculous amount of time to get a full view of a project. And so like I guess the bar was even lower than we kind of thought. So that always gets us really, really excited that we kind of keep hearing that story over and over again. Like the average construction company uses 6 or more softwares to run their business, and like the average user within the company is not really proficient in many of them or any of them.
100%. And then along with that, it's kind of having these individual softwares, individual processes, trying to put them all together. There's huge variances in the data and what's going on. You could have a paper report from 3 weeks ago, and that is the most up-to-date situation on the field. But in their software, they have a exact up-to-date. But these two things can be very conflicting. So it's a kind of an issue between efficiency and then accuracy that's kind of lost in all the scrambling around between different products and services.
Yeah, I would actually love to kind of ask you something more related to this. So like from a more of a data background, I think one of the biggest issues is that data management, especially with kind of siloed legacy tools, is kind of left in the hands of internal workers who usually do not have an extensive data background and more importantly, have their own job to do. That's their job. So, like, where do you see the future of data management at the point of input with AI?
I think AI, specifically the chat interface, is really interesting because it might be both the entry point of a workflow and the exit point of a workflow. So it's kind of a wrapper around any technical system, whether it's an orchestration tool or it's a data management tool. And the CRM is somewhere in between both. I found that there's really nothing that you could do to fix broken processes, and the drivers of broken processes, at least today, are typically human. So the strongest leverage point is really the automation of data entry and the automation of data governance. Because the more opportunities and the more levers that you give to a not data person to play with data, the worse it's going to get.
Yep.
So for typical implementation at the enterprise level, right, you usually have some sort of data platform in the background, which cleans and enriches data and syncs with whatever the CRM looks like. But then you lock those down, right? You lock those down so no one touches it. You have the source of truth, and then you have an additional layer for input, right, and fixes. And you can inject some governance into whatever that workflow looks like.
Definitely.
At least that's how I've seen it. And this is with high-tech companies. So I can only imagine what it's like for a legacy business like construction.
100%.
A mess. And I think that is probably the most important thing, is ensuring high data, like pretty much just a barrier to entry into our single source of truth, because it's only true if the data is good.
Mhm.
Like stale, incomplete, straight up incorrect data from multiple different siloed systems is a recipe for disaster. And coming up with pretty meticulous processes to ensure high data quality and data governance with a lot of fail safes and checks in place, I think is of the utmost importance. Garbage in, garbage out is the classic saying there.
That's
What's interesting to me is that the construction industry is very fragmented in terms of communication channels and how project management typically occurs. It's one of those things where you cannot escape having a programmer or a project manager, right?
Mm.
Because there are so many things going on, which maybe presents a challenge from a data capture lens. How are you guys thinking about data capture?
Yeah, I think a big part of data capture is definitely offline capabilities on site.
Mhm.
In practice, you're probably not going to have a good internet connection when you're on site. And also you need a tool like an iPad to be able to basically give your updates to the back office as close to real time as possible. And I think for project managers, a big problem, one comes down from kind of the larger data wrangling issue from the human bottlenecks of who knows what and who has access to what, but also just the noise of all projects, the amount of updates from different stakeholders, whether it be your vendors or your subcontractors or your client with change orders or your field team, all of these things, like having a streamlined kind of even just a simple dashboard where you can see updates as close to real time as you can get as they come in is a game changer that I think in theory exists kind of at legacy enterprise platforms, but in practice, those platforms are almost never implemented the way that they are kind of touted. I think the way that they're advertised is very smart, and I think it's not necessarily a fabrication. I think if you had a perfect implementation in enough time and enough iterations, you can get there. But in reality, most companies will never get that far.
Yeah.
They'll be sick of it or they'll be on to the next thing. And so like even just dashboards, a single source of truth in reality will provide so much easy visibility that the sheer amount of time saved will be
A game changer.
a game changer.
Along with just accuracy of everything kind of going along on schedule. I mean, construction projects historically always go off schedule, always go off budget. Having a place where you can have a live view of where the project is heading and be able to kind of proactively steer things rather than being like, oh, look, we have to go fix this. Our prices on this product just went up. Being able to kind of see things as they're going on and move accordingly is definitely going to be a game changer.
The way that we've kind of the best mental frame that we have been using for that is kind of the transition from reactive decision making with bad speed of data coming in and also bad quality to proactive decision making in a single source of truth. And then of course then it's just a matter of executing there. And we're
Yeah.
pretty excited.
Yeah, that makes sense. A vertical AI powered solution is the bet to make in 2025, right?
Mhm.
Definitely.
But from a statistical lens, most ERP and CRM implementations fail. And now we're finding out that most AI implementations fail. Are there any signals or challenges that just keep you up at night that might mean that your specific approach is going to go sideways? How do you manage those risks?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think it goes back to part of the true challenge of making, something platform that is applicable to all construction companies, but also flexible enough to make a bespoke solution that can fit to the unique business processes and workflows of any given company. In legacy systems, right? That's why consultants exist. Consulting is a massive, massive industry, even just Salesforce consultants. I don't know what the market size of Salesforce consulting is, but it's big. But to us, that has always been a sign of true inefficiency that the end users that the software is made for can't simply use it and customize it to fit their needs. And I think that is one of the most exciting things for us in terms of AI is making a scalable client discovery and onboarding process that both like ditches the need to do months of training for non-technical users, but also kind of moves away from this iterative hell that companies tend to get into when they make the jump for an implementation, where they'll try to describe their business as best they can to consultants who have some level of understanding of construction, for example, in general, but also not this company's particular business. And then they go try to create a solution, they bring it back, and then you say, well, this isn't, there's some fundamental assumptions that are just kind of wrong here. Like, this actually isn't how our work flows from person to person, from department to department in practice. There are a lot of assumptions that kind of have to be made along the way by consultants that they can only do so much with. And so I think the speed to iteration that AI kind of provides with this kind of natural language wrapper is incredible. I think the amount of time it would take to really customize a solution to be truly bespoke to a company can just be drastically reduced. And therefore, like, the risk that a construction company takes on in kind of jumping to a new solution is really deleveraged in that way. Because a lot of times what we see is, like, construction companies have been burned one too many times by, like, an implementation that's cost them like 50 grand and 6 months of going back and forth with consultants and the trainings and all these things, just to be left with something that either their workers still cannot use, or the system itself is just not equipped to handle their business. And so that kind of lowering the time to iterate to something usable is also something that we think is super exciting.
100%. And at the end of the day, you're going to know your business better than anyone else. So kind of translating your business to someone who you live and breathe what you do at a day-to-day in your construction company, translating it to someone who's a data person, who's kind of setting up the system there, there's always going to be a bit of a disconnect. So kind of enabling people to speak to their business, because they can explain it the best way possible, to set up their software is the best way to go about it, and probably the most accurate way and be able to get a bespoke solution.
That's so interesting. So it sounds like the wrapper for your business is a vertical ERP for construction, but really the problem that you're trying to solve is that CRM and ERP implementations fail. And the solution is something AI and agentic that prevents that from failing and therefore unlocking that market.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think, like, total cost of ownership is always something that we love to look at, because you can spend, from some horror stories from a bunch of construction companies that we talked to, including our kind of pilot users, is just, hey, we're coming from 8 different softwares in Excel and a slightly different version of Excel to run our business. We tried to go to this kind of centralized ERP platform for construction. We get half a year in, they kind of promised us the world in the sales process to kind of get us to take this jump. And then we revisit some of these issues where we're like, hey, can you make this customization for us? And they'll say, no, that's not really how our system works. Like, we can probably find a workaround. I think that's why it's so scary. And the total cost of ownership for taking a bet on something that the majority of the time doesn't work is nonsensical. So lowering, like, the total cost of ownership in the beginning, especially the investment that you have to put down, and letting the product kind of speak for itself, and then you make your own decision based on how well the product does, instead of taking a bet that the product will be as good as you were promised, is a fundamental change in the narrative that we now think is possible.
100%. And construction companies have been burned one too many times, it feels like. We talk to these people, and the big hesitation between these big tech implementations is just being promised the world, but having all these barriers put up, having it be so difficult, and just not getting what's promised. And we kind of believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Kind of going about it and enabling you to get truly what you want for your business is the best way to go about things.
Are there any parts of the conversation that you just totally ignore, or you think is outdated or irrelevant to what you guys are doing with Vector BI?
I think so. And I think another big thing that we're kind of putting off by the wayside is this notion that, like, a legacy software like a Salesforce can come along and just crush this. Like, basically just send an army of developers in to do what we're doing. The speed of the AI rocket ship, I think, is simply too fast for previously established giants to pivot in time. because as all of these like exciting things come out, like all the quantum computing, like new breakthroughs in machine learning, an alternative to the LLM, like a new agentic framework that is 10 times more efficient than chat, whatever. It's every week with these types of things. And so it's like for a giant legacy enterprise software to make a high conviction play is harder than ever. They really can't afford to take the time to see how new technology really performs and how usable it is at scale and all of these things, right? Because when they do, that's almost already out of date. Or there's already viable alternatives where, startups are just iterating and experimenting too quickly. And I think it's something for us to be mindful of as well, because that's it's the double-edged sword, right? It's our greatest opportunity and also the greatest threat. And that's something that we have to be very cognizant of, is if, we're finding early success, still being as on the forefront as humanly possible, right? Leaving our architecture flexible and open enough to say we're always being threatened to become outdated, and kind of making our architecture in a way that benefits our machine learning breakthroughs, new LLMs or LCMs or whatever the new model is, that can only really benefit us. So taking the diligence to stay agile, I would say.
100%.
I love that. So it sounds like the narrative around big tech distribution advantages is just noise, because you're going to get the early adopters and they will become the evangelists for the next wave of adoption.
Yep.
100%.
And out of curiosity, a big part of running fast is developing tunnel vision, which is usually pretty good, right? You want to be laser focused on your goals, test, iterate. In that process, are there any blind spots that you might have identified or things that keep you up at night in terms of things that you haven't quite wrapped your arms or head around?
I would say, yeah. I would say it really goes back to the onboarding and migration process. That by itself is the biggest problem to solve. I think it's been the biggest problem to solve for quite a long time, and certainly with legacy software. And it's a problem that we truly believe can be solved with an AI-driven solution, like AI-driven conversational style kind of data discovery and business discovery. I think is something that we're super interested in, but it's still really just the execution risk. Can we get it done?
Yeah.
And so where we are right now is, again, just really doing it manually. We're probably going to go live with our pilot users for a few weeks or a month or more and just go to work with them every day to really get as much information and down to earth conversations with people who are making the solution for as possible. So then we figure out the questions that we need to ask from everybody, what data requirements we need from everybody, and how we can make the process of gathering that as frictionless and as easy for them as possible using AI. Because the last thing you want is to send a field worker a long questionnaire that has some technical questions in there and is kind of ambiguous and is something that will probably never get done. We will probably never get that form back. But kind of using a much more relaxed conversational approach with AI in a scalable way that you no longer need to scale your internal headcount to go send your consultants to go do, I think is a way to make the discovery, migration, and onboarding process so much less painful for all of the stakeholders involved, us included. I mean, nobody likes this. It's just such a mess.
100%.
And I think that also comes that the discovery process also really comes down to the internal, kind of collective effort to keep everything up to date of the consulting team.
Yeah.
There's always new information coming in, and then you run into the same issue of humans being the bottleneck of being, the only person who just had that conversation with a client and have some really important updates to make and needing to tell your team all of those things immediately. If you don't have really, really good processes in place, you run into the same exact problem as clients do. And so I think AI really mitigates a lot of that struggle and complexity. And now we'll just have to keep working towards that and refining that process as we go.
100%.
I love that. The old wizard behind the curtain approach, and maybe a page straight out of the YC playbook where the Carlson brothers would go into, their client offices and literally install Stripe for them.
100
100%.
and doing things that don't scale. I think we've been looking a lot into that. We actually just went to an event with Harvard Business School professor Jeff Busgang in the city. He just wrote a book called The Experimentation Machine. Great book, awesome, especially for founders. Loved it. But really the thesis was that like founders who use AI will outpace founders who do not, and that AI really can crank up the lever arm on your ability to quickly iterate and validate hypotheses faster than ever. But it also comes back to, again, pumping the brakes a little bit, not getting carried away with your ChatGPT research, because chat is just going to be your best friend and tell you how awesome you are.
Exactly.
But really go and get the experience for yourself. Like that's more important than ever.
Being armed with the real life experience enables you to utilize AI to get the best output possible and move as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that could really replace that true understanding one-on-one with someone and their business.
I love that. My sense is that there's probably a very long conversation behind that thought. But in the interest of your time, are there any questions that I should have asked, but I haven't yet?
It's always a good one. I guess I would say, I suppose that I have a question for you, and I'll start with saying, like, being an super AI first company in terms of our product also means that we have to look internally and see how we can leverage AI and automation to increase our output. And it really forces you to kind of do a deep dive on what you do every day and what other people working for you do every day, and which of those processes are repeatable enough that they can be automated entirely versus enhanced by certain automations as well. And so I would just ask what your experience with that has been as a founder yourself.
That's actually been a huge pain point for me because, as you know, when things get busy with both drumming up business and fulfilling whatever it is that you're promised, typically consistency and quality are the first things to go. And consistency and quality is also the bar for any systematization.
Yes.
And it was that sort of thing that actually made me pivot to a services business. Because my sense is that when you get busy, building and maintaining systems is not really something that you can afford. It's the first thing that you delegate away.
Yeah.
Which is why typically a Series A starts to hire a VP of sales to build a sales machine, a VP of product to build an experimentation machine, something that you would have just done manually, but haven't really systematized because you're so busy.
Definitely. And I think like it's also, our processes as a startup with a few people are, we wear all the hats, and so there's a lot more room to automate certain things to make our lives easier. But what that looks like when we start to scale and we can start to delegate certain tasks to people who are rock stars at what they do, then it becomes how can we use AI to empower them instead of automating this process to the best of our ability, because we need to delegate our time in so many other ways. And so having, like in theory, like creating systems, repeatable systems that you can really just automate is great. But I think that is using a bit too big of a brush to kind of simplify the fact that systems change a lot. Sometimes that can be the biggest hurdle, is like knowing that some standard operating procedure or some automated system that you haven't had to think about in a while is like not cutting it anymore. And you gotta like sit down and refigure it out. So that's something that we've already kind of experienced, but we'll definitely have a lot more time to work with as we start to scale.
100%.
There's so little systems in place for human to human customer success and service that could really just benefit from an AI that just has access to every single conversation you've ever had, like every single ticket that has ever been sent in could absolutely do a better job. We're pretty adamant about that. And so like seeing how far that goes, I think is what we're excited to do, and just pushing the frontier.
The boundaries of like human error.
I love that. It is so ambitious. And I'd love to follow along your journey. For other folks who want to do the same, is there any way to follow along? Is there any channel that we should plug into?
Yeah, I'd say just kind of follow us and connect with both of us on LinkedIn, and check out vectorbi.com, where we post all of our updates.
Yeah. And I would say if you wanna chat and learn more, we'd love to chat. You don't not have to be a potential user, anybody with an interesting conversation to have. I think we really owe our success so far to the willingness of people with more experience and wisdom to share some of their insights with us for free.
100%.
That's been incredible. The founder community, even the construction community and the startup community in general, has just been fantastic for that. And so we're always happy to have conversations with anybody who wants to talk.
Along with that, I feel like some of the conversations you go in with the least expectations end up being the most impactful, whether it be idea wise, connections to other people. So just kind of talking to people is the main thesis of how we kind of go about things. It takes a village to get something done. So kind of having the ideas of many to push together is important.
I love that. JD, Aidan, thank you for sharing our high conviction bet, and we're excited to follow along.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.